Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves postcast. We are live following the Wolves' disappointing blowout loss to the San Antonio Spurs here on Monday night. Marty Geller and I are going to break it all down and share our key takeaways. The Locked On Wolves postcast starts now.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm joined by Marty Gellner of Bally Sports North. And Marty, after a solid road win in Oklahoma City on Sunday, the Wolves came back to Target Center on Monday for the second night of the back-to-back. And I don't know, there's really no other way to put it. That kind of laid an egg on the home floor. I'm not really sure where to start with this one. What's your... where do you want to start, Marty? What's your biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, you can't sugarcoat it. You really can't. It's disappointing. You use that word already, and that is 100% accurate. But it was also kind of shocking. This is not a contending San Antonio team, and that's not a rip on the Spurs at all. It's just the talent level that the Wolves have is superior. And the way the game went tonight, I mean, it was all Spurs. The 9-point margin does not really reflect this game at all. It was 35 points in the third quarter that the Wolves were down. And I just kept thinking, like, well, it almost seems like we can't come back from this. Like it was a different feeling than any of the other games that the Wolves have been down in, where fans fully expected that the Wolves would win. It was just a matter of how and by how much, and when do we get out of this rut? When do we turn it around? This was a totally different story. This was a completely outworked, completely out-energized. Chris Finch used the word out-punked. He didn't try to sugarcoat it either. It was shocking for me to see tonight.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what Chris Finch said post-game. For me, I mean, there's really a few different ways we could take this. I mean, you mentioned being outworked, being out-hustled. I mean, we could talk about how they'd given up by the 9-minute mark of the second quarter. So 15 minutes into the game, they'd already given up 50 points. For me, early in the game, the biggest issue was the offensive ball movement. There was just a lot of ball watching. And we see this kind of happen sometimes with the Wolves, even going back to last season, where they've got a lot of guys who want to score the basketball and are talented individual offensive scorers. And at times the ball would stop, just kind of get pounded into the floor for a few seconds. Everyone would ball watch, and then the possession would end in, a difficult shot, a drive that doesn't quite get all the way to the rim, a kick out for a contested jumper. It just, the offensive ball movement kind of ground to a halt early. But I mean, really, it was you said this, in all facets. And one of the other things that I think this team can get caught up into sometimes is when things aren't going their way, they kind of devolve into like this, I guess on top of the offensive issues, then it's worrying about the officiating, and it's some of the offensive, trying too hard and the offensive fouls that come with it. But I think the issues actually started overall on the offensive side of the floor, and eventually kind of spilled over into like, well, we can't score, we can't stop them either. And then it was just kind of an overall meltdown.
Yeah, it was a weird yin and yang, like how one affected the other. And it was almost like a frustration or an eye roll or a shrug or a pout. I don't know how you want to label it, but it was like once that started, it just snowballed so fast. And I don't know if it was the lack of defense that was spurring the lack of ball movement or vice versa, but they were both 100% present tonight. And sometimes it's like in a good way, like the ball doesn't move that well offensively because everybody is so capable of being the guy, and everybody is trying to be the guy and do it for the right reasons to help my team win. Hey, it's time for me to carry the load, that type of mentality. But there's a difference between that type of mentality and let's figure out collectively where this ball needs to go. Who needs the ball? Did we pass it enough? Are we in motion? Are we connected? Or it just like that was not there. The Wolves led 3-0. That was it. I mean, they never found it. I mean, I completely agree with what you said, Ben. And I don't know what the explanation is, because it's stunning to watch when you have this much talent and then you have these guys not putting it together. That's not to say it won't come. Hey, we're 4 games in. We get it. Everybody gets it. But to not be able to get out of it in a game like this, unless you count the fourth quarter, the 18-0 was the run. And it was the starters that Chris Finch stayed with and said he wanted them to figure out how to play together. I did think that was a good move on his part, a good conscious move of saying, basically, you made the mess, you got to clean it up, get us out of this. And also, let's try to figure this out, exactly what you're talking about, to get this thing going, to get this this machine lubed up, because it has not been to this point this season. And it definitely was not tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's actually talk a little bit about that at the end of the game when the Wolves did go with their starters. This was kind of it was like a 30-point-ish lead at that point. It got up to as many as 35 points. And yet Chris Finch went back to the starters and it was almost kind of like it didn't feel as much like Greg Popovich, coincidentally, the Wolves playing the Spurs, is famous for, a minute into the game, or, he doesn't do this that often, but pulls the whole lineup or sits them or whatever. Yeah. This wasn't quite like the reverse of that, like a punishment, like go out there, we're down 30, figure it out. But it was more like, we just got to figure it out. We got to give these guys minutes together to try and gel and search and find something. And they did. And it's really tough to tell whether that's fool's gold, in a game that was a blowout and ultimately it was out of reach. But it was nice to see them at least play with a little bit more urgency. And in some ways, it almost made it that much more frustrating, because, like, hey, you play this way to start the game. And obviously we're having a different conversation because, as you said at the outset, this is a much more talented, the Wolves have a much more talented roster than the Spurs. No one would argue that. And so if you just play hard to start the game, that cures a lot of ills, I think. And so to see that actually make a big difference down the stretch, now obviously the Spurs missed some shots and all that too, but I think just putting pressure on the opposing team would have been a really good way to start the game. And I thought, honestly, that was a really good move by Finch to try and see how that might affect it. Did he address that specifically at all post game?
Yeah. And he did say that he was trying to keep the 5 together, not as a punishment, but as time to gel, like just try to figure out how to get this group moving better. And he, Finch tried that lineup where it's Anthony Edwards and the 4 reserves of Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince, and Naz Reid. He tried that group twice tonight, once in the first half, once in the second, and he wasn't getting the same pop that he had gotten last night in Oklahoma City or a Friday night against Utah. So Finch was searching a little bit, but I think by that time, when you're that far down and the outcome seems imminent, then it was, the purpose was to get that group just to play more together, whether it's more minutes or play better. That was his intention. He did say that post game.
A couple more thoughts on some individual players that I want to get to here next. First, so let's talk about our sponsors of the program today, and that, of course, is our friends over at Prize Picks. If you take in, really, actually, the final lines for a lot of Timberwolves players looked okay because of that fourth quarter. So if you took Karl-Anthony Towns over on points, I guess Gobert's numbers weren't as great. D'Lo scored a lot of points. But if you'd taken the over on really any of these guys, probably almost any of the Spurs players over at Prize Picks, you would have done really well. Prize Picks is super easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry, and you're not competing against other people, not against professionals. It's you versus the projections. You can also cross sports. So if there's Monday Night Football and the NBA, you keep an eye on both. You can actually bet. Like you could bet the over on, I don't know, whoever the Bears start, Justin Fields, rushing yards, and the over on Towns points. You can do that. Your entries can be made in less than 60 seconds. It's extremely easy. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can get 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks gives you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. All right. So to kind of put a bow on this one, Marnie, I think, I guess for me, one of the biggest takeaways in this game, if we're going to take a positive away, and I'd like to try and do that. It's Jaylen Noel continues to play extremely well off the bench. We talked a little bit about him. I guess it would have been Friday nights following the loss on Friday to whoever they lost, Utah on Friday.
Utah.
Yeah. Jaylen Noel has been kind of a silver lining the first few games of the year, even though the 2-2 starts disappointing, but 13 points, 9 rebounds in this game, continues to be an extremely high usage player. He actually had the second most field goal attempts on the team, tied with D'Lo in this game, but was effective. Even though he was high usage, he was relatively efficient. He was active. He was one of the few players going after loose balls. I thought Jaylen Noel had a fantastic performance.
Yeah, and he was super noticeable right when he checked in. You mentioned the going for loose balls. It was just like he has this incredible motor and mindset, and he does not play quiet minutes. You rarely, sometimes a player will check out and you'll be like, oh, I didn't realize he was in the game. That never happens with Jaylen Noel. He's a bucket. He's going to get buckets. He's going to shoot to get the buckets. He missed a couple tonight in the second quarter when he first checked in, or first quarter when he first checked in. And he hit a couple, he missed a couple, but it was just like instant bam. There's Jaylen Noel. His presence is well known on the court. Last night in OKC, Naz Reid was talking about Noel after the game, and Naz was saying the mental side for Jaylen is where he's seen the most growth. Like defensively is where he needed it on the court. And I think Chris Finch and the Wolves coaching staff was pretty brutally honest with Noel. Like, this is where you need to improve to get your minutes. And he worked really hard at that, to his credit. And then it was the mental side. And I thought that was interesting that Naz Reid picked up on that and said that that's where Jaylen has really made some strides going into this season.
Yeah. And this is, we know that he now has a role, right? And Chris Finch talked about this in the offseason, that he's a part of, saw him as a part of the core of this team. And last year he was in and out of the lineup, and there just wasn't a consistent role. And now he is effectively that sixth man. And especially, I mean, Kyle Anderson still out with the back spasms, and I think Taurean Prince tweaked something during the game. And so he's going to be relied upon even more if there's injuries like this, but regardless, he's going to see minutes. On the flip side, and maybe I should have done this the other way around so we could end on a high note, but on the flip side, Anthony Edwards shot just 3 of 15, 1 of 8 on threes in this game. And, for as good as he was in Oklahoma City 24 hours prior, scoring 30 points and really leading the Wolves to a win, Euro stepping them to a win, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
This was back to kind of what we saw from Ant in the preseason, just kind of high volume, rough shot selection, not his best game. And I'm sure he'll bounce back in a couple of days here, but it was a little disappointing to see him, his on-court performance be as inefficient as it was.
Yeah, and I don't think he scored a bucket until the third quarter, and that was a little shocking too. And he, Ant can be a little hot and cold, but this was really extreme to go from exactly 30-point games, consecutive games. He'd only done that one other time in his entire career. And so I guess you kind of come into this game thinking, well, he's about to roll. This is going to be a big season. And not to say it won't, but to have that kind of a drop off and him not really be able to figure out how to get buckets against the Spurs was a little concerning. The good news, I would think any team that struggles as much as the Wolves did against the Spurs tonight, any team would love the scenario where you say, hey, in 2 days, how about you play that exact same team on that exact same court, essentially in the exact same circumstances. I think that is a huge opportunity for the Wolves, and one that if the game looks anything like it does tonight, then major concerns. I would also be completely more shocked than I am tonight if the Wolves did not play 1,000% better on Wednesday in the rematch.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's a great note to end on too, is the fourth quarter. That's maybe another reason why the fourth quarter is that much more encouraging, because you're going to face the same team here in 48 hours. So, Finch giving his guys the opportunity to build some confidence. Not that like they shouldn't need to do that against a team like the Spurs, but the Spurs are now 3-1 and they have to be taken seriously. And the Wolves found that out on Monday night. All right, that's all we have for you today here on the live postcast. We will be back on Wednesday following the game, each and every game. I'm joined by Marnie Gellner of Bally Sports North. Of course, we'll have the full post-game podcast on Tuesday as well on Locked On Wolves. Thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day, and we'll catch you next time.